My name is Janelle Maloney, and I'm recording an oral history today with Andrea Anton, or is it Anton?
Anton.
Anton. And we are talking about Agnews State Hospital and what it was like to visit and spend time there in the 70s. Let's go ahead and start with some background information before we go. Can you please spell your full name for me?
Sure. Andrea Anton.
Thank you. And what year were you born?
1962.
Wonderful. And Andrea, do you give me permission to record your audio and video today?
I do.
And do you give permission for family historians and historical societies or organizations to use your material in educational research purposes?
Yes, I do.
Wonderful. And today is September 5th, 2023. All right, so I want to go ahead and start with a brief introduction. Can you tell me why you have memories of Agnews State Hospital?
Well, my father worked there after my parents' divorce, and he worked there in the accounting department on the East Campus. And so every summer, my brother and I would go and spend a couple months or sometimes the whole summer there with him.
And at that time, how old were you and your brother?
I think I must have been 10 and my brother would have been 11. Yeah.
When did your father start working at Agnews?
He started working there in 1972.
And how long did he work there for?
He told me, let me just check here. He told me he worked there for nearly 10 years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
How did he end up working in accounting?
Well, he had a very interesting CV. He served in Korea in the shipping department, and he learned a lot about business in that. So he came back to where his home, Seattle, Washington, and he had the GI Bill, and he went to the University of Washington and got his degree in business administration. And that's a broad umbrella. You can do a lot of things under that. And then he just had a lot of jobs around the world and a very interesting career.
I'm sure. And part of that was coming to California. And you mentioned there was a divorce involved.
Yes, my parents split up when I was 9 years old. And yeah, and I pretty much grew up I grew up partly in the Bay Area and then partly in Redding, California.
Ah,
Yeah.
I spent many years in Antioch and Walnut Creek-ish area.
Yeah. Yeah. I used to work in Walnut Creek. That's great.
It's beautiful over there.
It sure is.
So I understand he wasn't intentionally becoming an accountant for the state hospital at that time. What was that experience for him to even get that job?
Yeah, he after my parents divorced, I'm just checking his uh so he was unemployed living with his mother in Palo Alto. And he said he visited the state employment offices in San Mateo, Redwood City, Mountain View, San Jose, and Milpitas, and couldn't find a job. And then one turned up. There was a federal program in San Mateo to help those looking for work. And and he said he could contact Agnews, and then he was hired.
Okay. And he begin working in accounting right away?
Yes, and that's where he stayed.
Ah, okay. And just so we're clear, what is your father's name?
Ronald Brittal.
Ah, and what year was he born?
He was born in 1928.
Okay. So when you went to the hospital to spend time with your father, You actually stayed on the campus, is that right?
Yes, my father had a studio apartment. These apartments were set up initially for staff members. So he found a studio apartment, and when my brother and I would visit him, all three of us would sleep on the floor. Um, and that was fun. We liked it. It was like camping. We were kids.
Sure. Was living on campus part of the agreement?
I don't really know that. Um, yeah, my according to my dad, money was tight, and I imagine if you worked there, you could rent a place for a very small amount of money. I don't think it was a requirement, but I'm not exactly positive about that.
And what did those living spaces look like?
They were just these little teeny tiny studio apartments, one room, a hot plate, a tiny bathroom, and that was it.
Mhm. Can you take us on a tour of the campus as it looked when you visited, starting with driving into the campus of the hospital grounds?
Okay, so there were two campuses, the East Campus and the West Campus. My father and we stayed in the East Campus. So when you came in the main entrance, on the West Campus, you saw all these really cool buildings, actually. Um, and straight ahead, you could see the clock tower, which is still there. It's been restored, which is really cool. Um, there was a canteen on the right side, and that's where some of the I call them kids, the patients. Some of the kids there would go and get, a treat, ice cream or a hamburger or a milkshake or something like that. And then I think it was right next to that. If you we would make a right turn, and then that would take us to the West Campus. And it seemed to me that that was a fairly long drive. I know with kids, everything seems like a long drive, but I've really thought about this. And, very, very, very large state grounds, just huge. And then on the east, I'm sorry, I've got it backwards. On the East Campus, where my father lived and worked, it was, you could see a lot of open fields, orchards, um, like where they would have vegetable gardens, but I don't think they really were using them at that time. Um, there was an old slaughterhouse, and me and my brother used to roam around that and think of how awful and creepy that was. Um, and then after that, it opened up, and that's where my father's apartment was. There was a row of them on the left side. And then behind that was a lot of office buildings, but also that was the area that, I'm sorry, you just asked me that. I'll just stop there. I'm kind of rambling.
However much you can remember and are willing to share, I will listen.
Okay.
And as a side note, I'm not interjecting ahas, mm-hms, so that way the recording comes out as clear as possible.
Okay, great.
Sure. So, besides working in accounting, did your father have any hobbies or side jobs or side activities on campus or off campus?
No, he did not. He worked there full time. Um, I would say one of my father's hobbies was drinking in the afternoon, having a martini or something like that, and just hanging out with us. And, it was nice. He wasn't drunk. He was not a drunk drinker. It just relaxed him. And my dad had a great sense of humor. And um, I don't know. I can't think of my dad ever doing any hobbies, honestly.
What kind of work schedule did he have?
He worked Monday through Friday from 9 to 5, I believe.
So, if he was working full time, who would supervise you and your brother during the day?
Well, my father signed us up to volunteer to keep us busy while he was working. And I volunteered with the Down syndrome children on the West Campus, and my brother volunteered on the East Campus at the petting zoo. And my father remembers him also working in the kitchens, but I don't remember that. But either of our memories could be flawed. My dad's 95, and I'm 60. So
So he volunteered your brother in the kitchen, or he himself volunteered in the kitchen?
he volunteered my brother, yeah, in the kitchen and the petting zoo. There was a petting zoo there.
Yeah, can you tell us more about this petting zoo?
Yeah, there weren't that many animals, but they would take the kids over there on occasion. And the only animal I really remember was a llama. And my brother and one of the young men that lived there that was a patient, they both encouraged me to go up and pet the llama, knowing full and well what the llama would do. And of course, the llama spit all over me. I mean, it was like the size of a golf ball. Yeah, it was awful and humiliating. They're laughing at me.
Were these animals for entertainment, play, more like pets, or were they used therapeutically?
Yeah, I think what my memory is they would take groups of kids over there, just for not necessarily play, but to interact with the animals. And there may have been some kind of a therapy involved with that, but honestly, I don't remember that part.
Okay, yeah, I think that would have been very new to have some sort of animal therapy program emerging, maybe even unofficially at that time.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm. Was there a cemetery on campus?
Um, Gosh, can't remember. I I'm checking my notes, pardon me.
Sure.
I I'm sure there must have been. I'm sure there must have been. I'm just seeing if I had any specific memories about that. Um, no, I do not see any specific memories or remember anything, but yeah, I would imagine there would be.
Mhm.
You
So
know,
a lot of
it,
them had their own.
yeah, because these kids were turned over to the state when often when they were born. And so they were under the state's authority. Um, but then there were a lot of patients that had families that would still come and visit them. So I'm thinking maybe some of the kids were buried in family plots, but I would think most of them were not because a lot of people, the kids were just like left there
Mm.
and parents did not come get involved with them.
Hmm. You noted that there's an east and a west campus. Was there another portion of the campus, like a north and a south, or were those the only two parts?
Yeah, those are the only two parts.
Okay. You mentioned the slaughterhouse and some kind of garden, but was there a building for specific types of patients? For example, I think you have in your notes that the East Campus primarily housed the criminally insane or the dangerously insane. What was the designation on the buildings that you remember?
Now these buildings were not being used at that time. I don't know what they had done, but they were not being used. But my dad told us that this is where the criminally insane people were. And my dad had a great sense of humor and liked to mess with us. And he told us, oh, yeah, at night you can still hear them out there howling. And so my brother and I, after my dad was asleep, we would sneak out and go to those buildings and somehow figured out a way to get in and kind of roam around these empty buildings, which was really cool. But of
Mhm.
course, we never hurt anyone. That was my dad.
Many stories like that have emerged from these types of buildings, and the experiences that are had in them produce these kinds of memories and, I guess, paranormal activity. In the case of my great grandmother, who was at St. Peter's Asylum in Minnesota, there have been multiple accounts of um, folks screaming for help from underneath the buildings where they had a system of tunnels. And that system would allow them to be able to transport the food carts and the laundry carts between buildings without having to go outside in the freezing cold winters. And sometimes
Interesting.
patients would actually go down in the tunnels to maybe escape, or who knows what they're doing, and they would get lost. And so that kind of haunted people for a while. Was there anything at Agnews that haunted you?
Well, I've been doing some research preparing for our interview, and some people believe that Agnews is haunted. Um, I it I just I don't know. We were kids, and my dad told us that these areas were haunted. But like I said, we never experienced anything firsthand.
Okay. Some of the records say that the Agnews Hospital was particularly cheerful, and it was intentionally designed to be a cheery place to be. What were some of the details you remember from the inside that would make it a cheery place to live as a patient?
Yeah, it was designed that way, and like I said, the buildings were really lovely, and the grounds were tended very nicely. Um, the only I was only in a few buildings where I volunteered. Um, and then there were, you had to go through a series of locks and corridors, and the day room that I worked in a lot was it was very cheery. Yeah, there was lots of they would put the kids' art up on the walls, and just kind of decorated almost like a an elementary school classroom.
Mhm. Where did the children or the patients eat their meals?
Um, gosh, I would imagine that there were cafeterias. But I personally never saw those or went to those, but that's what I would think. But I honestly, I don't know.
Did you ever see where they lived or their own personal rooms or dorms?
Well, on the West Campus, where I worked with the Down syndrome kids, I did not. On occasion, I and I actually I believe these were also on the West Campus. I can't remember why, but on occasion I would go through these wards that were awful. These were for severely disabled people, some of them self-harming, some of them violent. Um, I don't know what the full extent was, but those buildings were awful. They were heartbreaking. Patients were strapped down, and it seemed to me that they were strapped down most of the time. It smelled like urine and feces as soon as you opened the door, or the door was opened. Um, they were screaming, moaning, just making some terrible sounds. A lot of them were not verbal and or were not able to speak. But I lost my train of thought.
I was
Yeah,
going to ask specifically about patients in any kind of restraints. And you mentioned them being strapped down. What do you mean by being strapped down? What was that you saw?
Yeah, it was a long ward, and there were beds lining each side of it. Um, Beds maybe 3 feet apart or so, maybe 4 feet apart, and they were strapped to the beds.
Okay.
Yeah,
Were any
it
of the children that you volunteered with restrained somehow?
no, they won't. They weren't the Down syndrome kids. Just imagine maybe a 5-year old child in a big body, like a half grown up or a grown up body. And these kids were wonderful. They were the most loving, happy. Um, Sorry, I'm about to cry thinking about them. They were just so great. It was just amazing. Just loved them. I walked in the door and they would all come rushing to me and hug me. And we just had so much fun together. We would take them for walks around the grounds. We would do art and activities with them in the day room. And then once a week, we would take them out into the public. We would take them swimming in a public swimming pool, take them out for ice cream, take them out to like there was a small amusement park there, not like the big giant ones now, but like a little city amusement park in the old days, and things like that. And they just loved it, and we would go out in these groups, and people would just stare at them and back away because, back then, like I had never seen a Down syndrome kid, because back then they were put into hospitals. I don't think they ever, or if they did live at home, I think their parents probably kept them inside or on their own property because of how bad they were treated out in the world. So, yeah,
And again, for context, we're not talking about the 1800s of anything. This is in the 1970s.
exactly. Yeah, it was a very different world. Now you see Down syndrome kids, um, not a lot, but I see them on occasion, and they're awesome. They're all awesome. You know.
When you were working with them, was there a daily routine of sorts that you walked them through, or did you personally have a routine for getting through the day?
Yeah, I think we usually started the day in the day room doing games, doing art projects. Then there was a mid-morning snack, which was usually cookies or yeah, usually cookies. I think that's what I remember, cookies. And then at lunch, they would go, I think, off to their cafeteria somewhere, but I didn't go there. That was like my time off, like my lunch hour as well. And then so I would go to the canteen or just roam around the campus and then come back. And then we would take them out for walks. And we would drive over to the petting zoo. And, they just loved being outside because even though they weren't violent and they weren't no harm to anyone, they still were kept up indoors a lot, you know? And so they just loved being outside. And again, we would play games outside with them as well, you know, like playground games.
Did you ever see them receiving, the children receiving treatments or medications or injections, or was it more of a custodial care situation?
Yeah, I do remember the kids getting some medications. Um, Not all of them. And I was a kid and I just did what I was told, and I wasn't asking a lot of questions, and I really don't know what those medications were, but East Campus, or I'm sorry, yeah, the East Campus was, like I said, it was defunct, it was shut down, but they had done lobotomies and what's the other thing? Lobotomies
Electric
and
shock was very
electric shock. Yes, thank you. Electric shock therapy there. I never saw any of that. Um, I think by the 70s, they weren't really doing lobotomies anymore. It was a huge thing when it came out that literally cured and changed people's lives forever. But then there were a lot of very devastating side effects like death. So I think electric shock therapy must have come out around the 40s or 50s. So I mean lobotomies,
1930, mid 1930s is when electric
30.
shock became a mm, common practice.
Yes. Um Now I do believe they still do electric shock therapy in the current day. So I'm sure there were patients there that were receiving those. I did not see that part,
Well,
thankfully.
electrical stimulation has also been expanded in its use to very broad applications. We now use electrical stim to help patients in physical therapy purposes and for all kinds of other issues. So even though
Yeah.
it's not uh, dramatically being used in psych practices, it is being used so commonly and so nuanced that we don't even necessarily consider it to be electrical stimulation as a medical therapy for our bodies and our healing. So interesting, even things like the freezing cold ice baths that were used. Now we have
Hmm.
ice baths for the top level athletes and Olympians, and it's no
Right,
big deal.
right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Your father's notes mention that sterilization was still being practiced while he was there.
Yes. Both the females and the males were sterilized without needing any consent whatsoever. Um, some of these kids did make romantic attachments, and you know, I never saw any of this, but I would imagine, you have this adult body that has sexual urges. So I'm thinking they knew that some of these kids were basically hooking up and, they didn't want them to procreate. And, when you think about that now, that's heartbreaking as well, to sterilize someone without their consent or their parents' consent.
Mhm. Was that primarily with the Down syndrome patients, or do you believe, or does your father know that it was applied generally to all patients?
I really don't know the answer to that question. I would think it was applied to other patients, but like I said, the wards that I went on where the kids were strapped down, I don't think that they might not. I know, actually, I think they did. I think it was a general thing that they just did, you know,
Very
because
sad.
it is so sad. And they the way people thought about that special kids back then was, yeah, we don't want more of these in the world. It's a bad thing. And again, yeah, heartbreaking.
Do you know were any babies born on campus while you were there?
Nope.
Okay. Did you ever get to see the patients have visitors?
Yes. I think it was every Saturday or every Sunday was family day. And we would see, lots of families, and it was beautiful. and the kids, just like any kid, so happy to see their parents and their brothers and sisters. Um, Unfortunately, there weren't a lot of families that came. Like I said, back in the day, the doctors, if a mother gave birth to one of these children, the doctors would say, you cannot possibly give this child the care it needs. We'll put it in the hospital and the state will take care of them. And there was a lot of shame involved for women in families having a baby like this. And so, unfortunately, a lot of, I think most of these kids were just abandoned, you know.
Did you ever get to see them go home?
Nope, ever.
Did you ever go around snooping into something you weren't supposed to?
All the time. We were kids and we were like little criminals in a way. I mean, we were good kids, but we had this, kind of crazy criminal thing about us. And we loved doing things we weren't supposed to do. We loved to roam the orchards that they no longer used and climb the trees and eat lots of fruit, to the point that sometimes we got sick because we ate so much. Again, we did enjoy the slaughterhouses because they were so creepy. And so if we could get into some of the empty buildings, yeah, we did that a lot. Absolutely.
Okay. Did you ever meet any of the psych team doctors or social workers?
Um, the only people I met personally in that regard were the people that were, the staff. I would say they were probably nurses, you know. I don't remember. I may have seen doctors, but and said hello, but I don't see them interacting with the patients in the capacity that I was in there.
What did the nurses wear?
They wore, what did they wear? I think I'm thinking, gosh, I can't really remember, but I'm thinking they wore, I think back then they still wore the white dresses and the white nursing shoes. You know, they don't they don't dress that way now. They dress in scrubs, but no, and I don't think that they were wearing street clothes.
What did the
Yeah.
patients wear?
Oh, the patients wore all kinds of clothes, regular clothes. They were all donated clothes. I don't think any of them ever had a new outfit, unless maybe their parents brought them something special on visiting day. So, and these kids were able to dress themselves. So, they were dressed kind of kooky. You know, there could be a girl in a prom dress and she loved it. Like if you could imagine a little 5-year-old girl wanting to be a princess, that's what it was like. There were a lot of mismatched clothes and ill-fitting clothes, either too big or too small. Um, but that didn't seem to bother them at all. You know, these kids live like just like little kids. They don't, that stuff doesn't bother them. I mean, not to be negative or critical, but they did like to, they'd come in and say, look at my shirt, look at my outfit, look at my shoes. And I'd say to the girls, oh, you look so beautiful. And to the boys, oh, you're so handsome. And they just loved that. But yeah, the clothes were kooky.
Were there any patients that stood out to you that you remember particularly well?
Well, yes, this is the man I mentioned earlier. He was about 20 years old, and he was not Down syndrome, and he communicated and behaved like a non-disabled person. Um, And he hung out a lot with my brother because he worked at the petting farm with my brother. And I don't know what diagnosis he was, but he was able to roam the campus freely. And but there was something about him I couldn't put my finger on that kind of creeped me out. I don't know. There was a part of me that felt a little afraid of him, but he never did anything, hurtful or anything. And then my best friend Patty would come to visit sometimes for a couple of weeks. And the first time she was there, I was still working, and she showed up by bus, and my dad picked her up at the bus station, and he took her to the canteen, and then he had to go back to work. So she was hanging out in the canteen, and this guy comes up right away and says, "Can I buy you lunch?" And she said, "Okay." We were kids. We didn't have money. We were lucky if we had a quarter in our pocket. And then he was flirting away with her. And then he says, "Well, do you want to go out on a date with me?" And, she was like 13 years old. And of course she declined. um, and then, gosh, I was thinking of someone else, but it just flew right out of my head. Um, yeah, I think that's all I can say. Let me quick check my notes real quick here.
That's the only story that I remember you bringing up.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So you mentioned your friend coming to visit. Did you have any friends within the campus?
Yes. They were young adults. They were hippies. Tom and Peggy. They weren't married, and they had a really cute cottage on campus. I believe she worked as a nurse, and I don't really remember what he did for work. But this was really cool. Like as I got older, my dad said, "Well, you're getting to be a little too old to be sleeping in one room with two guys." So anytime Tom and Peggy went out of town, I got to stay there alone. I loved it. It was so cool. And also sometimes I would visit them. I would stay with them when they were there. And they were super nice. I mean, I just adored them, and they just adored us too, and my dad. And they would meditate, in the mornings. And they said our only rule is when we're meditating, we ask that you maybe go sit quietly outside and read a book or take a walk. And I said, "Oh, of course, I'm happy to do that." And I loved staying there. And then especially when they were gone, it was like, for a kid that young to like stay in their own, not not my own, but alone in a house. And one thing I didn't mention in my notes that was just a thing that I remember that happened. I got up in the morning to make myself some tea, and I used a tea towel to pick up the tea kettle to pour it, and it was a gas stove, and I set it on fire. Oh yeah. And luckily I just dropped it and stomped it out, and I didn't burn anything else. But I was devastated that I did that. I came into your house and I burnt something. So of course I told my dad, and he said, "Well, let's go buy a new one." And I said, "Yes, please, please." I just remember feeling so bad about that, because they were so nice, and I didn't want them or my dad to think that I was not capable to stay there on my own because I loved it so much.
What did friends outside of the campus think about where you live and what you're doing?
Well, we just spent the summers there. So I only remember one girl my age. I can't remember how I met her. Um, but you know, she thought it was weird. Yeah, she thought it was weird. That's how it was back then, you know. Um, but then we didn't talk about it a lot. We were girls, we were goofing off and talking about Peter Frampton and whether how to put on makeup and how to do our hair and trading clothes and the things that teenage girls do.
Sure. Were there any emergencies on the campus while you were there? Maybe it was a weather emergency, earthquake, maybe there was an escape attempt or something like that. What happened?
Um, I wasn't aware of anything like that. The all the buildings were very, very secure. Um, you literally had to go through a door, a corridor, a locked door, a corridor, and a locked door. Um, and the kids were always under supervision. Like I said, some of these kids that were severely disabled probably never left the building. Um, I did see some of the severely disabled in wheelchairs with nurses. So they were constantly under supervision. I do not remember any kind of emergency like that. I don't believe I don't remember seeing like an ambulance coming through because all the medical care was available to them there on the campus. You know, I don't know if they had, yeah, they probably did have operating rooms and things like that. So, yeah, I wasn't aware of any um, emergency or anyone escaping. Now, back when the campus was first built, I think in 1903, and then there was the earthquake in 1906, and it destroyed it. And there was a myth that a bunch of patients escaped, probably the criminally insane patients, And but then I read some more, and it said that really wasn't the truth. So I really don't know, but it's kind of a cool story.
Or it could be really good PR management.
Yeah, that's exactly what it probably was. You got it.
What is a particular sound that you'll never forget from when you were there?
The sounds of these severely disabled kids moaning and screaming that were strapped down. Um, I also remember the keys. There were always these really big keychains that I was never in charge of. It was always a nurse or another grown-up volunteer or another grown-up employee but the sound of these giant keychains, like on a big circle like this and probably 30 keys on there, probably weighed about 3 pounds, So the clanking of the keys, yeah.
Wow. What
Yeah.
about a particular smell? Was there a smell that you remember and you'll never forget?
Yeah. Even on the wards with the Downs kids, you know, it was just kind of a weird, funky smell, kind of a combination of body odor and dirty carpet. Um, just kind of a funky smell. And then, like I said, in the severely disabled wards was the smell of urine and feces that I had never smelled before. These kids were literally lying in their own filth. It was tragic to see that. Yeah.
Mm.
And then the canteen, the smells of the food coming out of the canteen, and the food there was really good. Well, I was a kid, so a burger and some fries was always good to me.
Have you ever been back since?
No, I haven't. And I have family that's still in the Bay Area, and I do go down there every few months now. And the next time I go, I really want to go back to the campus. Now, what I have read though is that um, I believe the West Campus with the clock tower, they have built an elementary school a middle school, and then this summer they completed a high school on that campus. And then I'm not sure what's happening on the East Campus, but I do think there are still some derelict buildings there. Oh, and Oracle, that was right in the heart of Silicon Valley. The campus was huge. It was like over 400 acres, I believe. And so Oracle did buy a portion of that, a big portion of that. So maybe I think that's what happened on the East Campus. Um, but again, I was even surprised. My dad had friends in that area, and he stayed in that area for some time, and it was closed not long after my dad stopped working there. And it was really interesting to find out how long it took for Oracle to be able to buy that space, because this was owned by the state. And we know how government agencies are. They're very slow, and there's a lot of, bureaucracy there, and probably took a lot of time for that deal to happen.
It's my understanding that there's a museum that in that tech buyout, there was a portion set aside to preserve the stories and the memories and the history of the building. And I'm hoping that maybe one day you can go and revisit, but also to see the museum and to experience this in a mature and informed manner, um, to be able to compare that side by side to what you remember being blissfully ignorant.
Yeah, I would love to do that. And it would probably spark even more memories for me. And just being on the campus itself,
Mhm.
would spark memories. Just probably just even seeing that clock tower. And I'm sure the campus is it's all very, very different now, but I would still love to go. And thank you for telling me about the museum. I was not aware of that. Yeah, love
What
to
are,
see that.
my apologies, what are some of your key takeaways from this experience?
Um, some really good takeaways. Um, I was very young when I started volunteering, and it instilled in me uh, how important volunteer work is. So I ended up volunteering all the way through school, all the way through adulthood. When my kids were in school, I volunteered with every activity. I taught art. Um, I I volunteered in the church. Um, yeah, I did it. That was one thing really important that it instilled in me. And then the second thing was, when I saw someone that was different in any way, I just really had an open mind about that, and really an acceptance that people are different and it's okay. And I think that was a beautiful gift, and especially if I see a Down syndrome kid and I'm near, like if I'm walking by them on the sidewalk or in the grocery store, I'll always smile to them and say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And oh, their faces again just would light up. So yeah, that it was a wonderful life lesson for me.
How many summers did you end up volunteering at the hospital?
I'm thinking 3 or 4 summers. Yeah.
And that was from approximately 1972 to 1976.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Mhm. What do you hope that future listeners to this interview will take away from what you have shared?
I think first of all is thinking about special kids with love and not being afraid of them, being kind to them, and being able to experience that really unique joy. And also, just, how awful some of those circumstances were, like the severely disabled. And, you know, I think it's important to remember those parts because, it's important that we don't do that. Now, I'm sure these days there are people that are severely disabled, and I just hope that they are living in better conditions, you know. But, and then just the history of it, just a wonderful history. Yeah.
Well, it's about all the time that we have for today's interview. But are there some parting words that you want to make sure are documented from now on?
I just want to say that it was such a wonderful experience to be there. And I want to say, again, be kind to people that are different. Always, always be kind.
Very nice. Thank you so much, Andrea. And again, my name is Janelle Maloney, and today is September 5th, 2023, and it is now the close of this interview.
Thank you, Janelle. It's been a real pleasure.